Hello and welcome to the Terrace Scottish Football Podcast. My name is Craig Telfer, and on this very sunny occasion, I am joined by my close associate Shaughan McGuigan.
Hello there.
And you know what happens when the Eddie Goldtooth Gurecki and the Jonathan Jolly Stansby of the Terrace get together? That is right, we are going to scale the Royal Courts of Justice in London while dressed as Batman and Robin respectively to bring our Fathers for Justice pressure group to the wider public and highlight the perceived negative treatment of fathers in the family courts. And while the police are circling on us and trying to talk us down, we might get the chance to discuss some lower league football while we're there.
I'm glad you described their actions, as I had no idea who they were. What did they dress up as? Batman
and Robin.
Was it Robin? I knew one was Batman. I wasn't entirely sure what the other one was. Yeah. Robin makes sense, I suppose.
I think the most famous one scaled the Houses of Parliament dressed as Batman, and he had the banner alongside him. But it doesn't really work. If I was doing this podcast myself, then yes, I could say I am the Batman of the Fathers for Justice group. But you need two. And so thankfully, Eddie Goldtooth Gurecki and Jonathan Jolly Stansby, we can thank them. And interestingly enough, Shaughan, Jolly Stansby's got his own Wikipedia page, and effectively it's just a list of civil disobedience.
What about Goldtooth Gurecki? Is he hung up his cape?
Doesn't have much of an internet footprint beyond that. I'm going to assume that stunt was enough to get him back in the good graces of his ex, and he was given access to the kiddies.
Or quite the opposite.
Or quite the opposite. That was the last time he ever scaled anything. His love for his children was just too overwhelming. He didn't want to be in a world where he didn't have access to them every Tuesdays and Thursdays and every second weekend.
It just feels like such a ridiculous protest that it can't do any good. Like, surely no fathers have benefited from that, I don't know, display.
Well, you know something, actually, there was if you go on the BBC website and search for Fathers for Justice, which, believe me, dear listener, I did, there's almost like a timeline of disobedience. So on the day that Gurecki and Stansby scaled the Royal Courts of Justice, the next day there was a tank that drove down London just to raise awareness about this campaign. So, I mean, here we are, Shaughan. That was 2003. 22 years later, we're still talking about Fathers for Justice. So whether you like it or not, the campaign has had some effect.
But again, if you are perhaps a mother or a court even, and you're swithering about whether or not to give further access to a father who has scaled a building dressed as Batman or driven down a high street in a tank, I'm starting to think that the answer should be no.
Well, Shaughan, I'll point in the direction of the hit 90s movie Mrs. Doubtfire. Now, while Robin Williams' character didn't climb the Royal Courts of Justice or drove a tank down a street, some of the methods he went to see his kids were pretty out there. I think ultimately at the end, the family reconciled. Am I right in saying?
I mean, he proved over a period of an hour and 45 minutes he was a very good babysitter. So yes. Ultimately, all kind of fitted in.
Mrs. Doubtfire is a fucking great movie. I'm actually just smiling thinking back about how funny it is. The bit that stands out is when it dresses Mrs. Doubtfire, he's sitting on the bus and his knees are on show and they're really hairy, and the bus driver goes, "Natural, I like that."
Just a fine comedic actor. I miss him.
Aye, he was. And the thing is as well, what I really liked about the movie, Daniel Hiller, Robin Williams' character, he's the bad guy in it. He's the villain of the piece. I think it's like Pierce Brosnan's character who ultimately starts courting Sally Field and who gets poisoned by some Cajun seasoning. I think he's positioned as the bad guy in it. He's not actually the bad guy because he talks really highly of the kids and how much he enjoys spending time with them and how much he enjoys spending time with the wife. So that's what I think what that movie is really good. There's quite a degree of ambiguity about who the villain is. I mean, obviously, Mrs. Doubtfire is painted as the hero, and she is very funny. And some of the scenes as well, the really funny bit as well, when Sally Field comes over to visit him, and he dips his face in the flan.
Hello. I don't know how we got here. Well, we're 4 minutes and 47 seconds in. We're talking about Robin Williams dipping his face into a flan. Fair play.
Have you ever seen the trailer of Mrs. Doubtfire where it's cut as a psychological thriller? Have you ever seen that?
No, but I will seek it out.
Dig it out. I'll send it to you when we finish up. It's really funny. Obviously, Mrs. Doubtfire, it's a comedy with a bit of an edge to it. But this looks like something out of like Basic Instinct. or The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, something like that. One of those pretty edgy thrillers. Really good. It's all got the tongues, a lot of stuff like that, and lots of people peering through windows.
I suppose it did appear at a time of a number of, I suppose, erotic thrillers like Slither, for example. But no, that certainly wasn't one. Well, I'm glad it wasn't one. Mrs. Doubtfire and
the
an erotic
closest
thriller.
bit to eroticism we do get in Mrs. Doubtfire is when the son goes to the bathroom and Mrs. Doubtfire's standing up having a piss. That's the closest that we get to eroticism in that movie.
I suppose it depends what you think is erotic.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly some people think in the business they call it a golden shower. I think they might find that erotic, but well, who knows? Listen, I'm not here to kink shame. What I'm here to do though is talk about lower league Scottish football. That's what I'm here to do. I'm here to talk about lower league Scottish football, and Shaughan and I, we are reverting back to our patented 3-game roundup of the biggest games in the lower leagues. We'll be covering one game from the Championship, one game from League One, and another fixture from League Two. And just to reiterate, this format is patented. If we find out that you and your lesser podcast have been stealing our format, Shaughan and I will come down on you like a ton of bricks. We know you and Taylor. He's a solicitor, very litigious. He will come down on you like a ton of bricks. That's something that we can promise you. And on top of that, we can promise you that. What we can't promise you is you'll have a laugh at any point. Shaughan and I, for the past decade or however long it is that we've been working together, we've yet to really hit that sweet spot of a chuckle. But we're working on it. We're trying our best.
We'd be excellent on that game show where nobody's allowed to laugh. Is it on Amazon, on Netflix, where they're getting funny people, I suppose?
I saw a clip. Yeah, I saw a clip of that though, and there was one of the comedians reads out the mission statement from the RNLI, I just didn't understand it or didn't find it all that funny.
Well, then you'd be ideal for it. You'd maybe make the final four.
Well, perfect, and we could do a live version of this podcast, and they'd be sitting there like, "What the fuck is this?" And then we'd all make the final four. Sounds good. How's everything otherwise?
Very well, thank you. What about you?
Yeah, fine. Right, we'll just go into the football. So there's no big stories, no massive life-changing events over the past couple of days. Just being involved with the football, doing the stuff for a view from the terrace, all good, and it's all stuff that's easily accessible to the people that watch this. So, all good. Do please keep watching, and do please keep on tuning into the podcasts. You know, if you've stopped listening by this point, then these words are falling on deaf ears. But do give it a go. But Shaughan, before we kick off properly and discuss the 3 games, I think it's important to check in on the ongoing situation at Queen's Park, because last week, when you and I caught up, that was the Tuesday, the Spiders had recently lost to Livingston in the SPFL Trust Trophy, and I think we had concerns about the direction of travel the club were heading in. Since then, however, they've been beaten by Airdrieonians 5-0 on the Wednesday night. They lost once again to Livingston, going down 3-0 at the weekend. And while these defeats might have been expected on the current form, I don't think anyone really could have envisioned Lord Willie Haughey withdrawing his patronage from the football club. Now, his sponsorship, I think through the City Group, I thought it was supposed to last a decade. That was a 10-year project. It's going to come to an end in June 2026. And this was announced in a Daily Record article published. It must have been within minutes of the full-time whistle of the Airdrie match. I think this was client journalism at its very finest. And I think that it said that Haughey had become frustrated with the bureaucracy and the membership process at Queen's Park. And there was also an article that came out a couple of days later that said he'd been slighted by a team names at a pub quiz hosted by the club. Nepotism FC was one of them. Haughey out was another one. And I don't know how much truth there is in that. It feels like there's a bit of street talk to it. But nevertheless, Haughey's withdrawal from the club, it's cast not just the men's team into doubt, but there's the future of the women's team. And the club's elite academy was unclear. Now, if you want a thorough analysis of this situation, far more in more depth than Shaughan and I could go into, listen to the most recent episode of the Spiders Talk podcast. 3 people that are associated with the club who are far closer to the situation than Shaughan or I are. But that doesn't stop us chipping in our 2 cents. And Shaughan, what have you made of what's going on at Queen's Park just over the past week, 10 days or so?
I think if I was a Queen's Park fan, what would frustrate me the most is probably what's frustrated Queen's Park fans over the last 5-6 years, whatever it is, and essentially the communication. Because see, if you if you read the fairly limited statement that was put out on the website, and as you say, the almost laughable at points articles that have went out online in terms of some of the newspapers, it feels like everything's fine. Everything's fine. The sponsorship is ending in 2026. There seems to be some suggestion that was what was going to be the case anyway, and the club then has 14 months to essentially get their ducks in a row, I suppose. So it all feels like everything is calm and under control. However, in real life, the academy seems to be going in the bin. The women's team seems to be under a bit or in a bit of bother as well. It doesn't look like they'll be continuing after the summer. So yes, the words are saying one thing, but the actual actions are like, in terms of the academy and the women's team, that kind of feels like something that a team would do if they are worried about administration, for example. And that might not be the case, but certainly the actions of the club feels like they're panicking, whereas the words, and let's face it, these articles look like they've been written by Willie Haughey himself, and then the journalist had just put his name, like copy and pasted, then just put his name to the bottom. So I think if I was a Queen's Park fan, that would be probably the thing that has frustrated me and worried me the most over the last 10 days.
Yeah, but you're worried, really, and you feel sorry for the people involved at the club who all bought into the project, the people who are probably going to lose their jobs off the back of it, the coaches, the young players as well. There's quite an interesting post in Pine Bovril from, take it with a grain of salt because it's anonymous, somebody who'd only posted a couple of times. I think it was a player's father who spoke about what his son had been sold, going back to when Marion Bucher was involved, and how the academy doesn't appear to be moving in the same positive direction as it had been before he departed for Ajax. And so I feel sorry for them, but yeah, it did feel like that this is quite a big threat to the club, and I think that trying to move into self-sustainable model, that's ultimately, I think that's what every football supporter wants. You don't want to be relying on a benefactor or a wealthy patron or anything like that, but just what being self-sustainable looks like for Queen's Park. And I think that might just be maybe what they always just should have been in the first place, just a good part-time team. However, the worry is, Shaughan, though, and this is a point that was raised in the Spiders Talk podcast, and something I'd like to say, I arrived at this conclusion myself before I listened to it, in case anyone thinks I'm stealing someone else's ideas, but it doesn't feel like the club are in a better place than they were back in 2019 when they moved from amateur to professional. And what I mean by that is your academy could be going. There's talk there that it might be rescued if they can pull the funding together, which would be great if they can keep it going. However, they're losing their academy and they're moving to a poorer stadium than Hampden. I mean, Lesser Hampden is materially worse than Hampden. So it's do you feel like you've taken multiple steps forward? You could have been playing Premiership football at one point, but then you're just back to where you were, but slightly worse off. Yeah,
and in a stadium where. And that's what was annoying me. Like, I think I read at least 2 articles that suggested that Haughey had built a new stadium for the club. Well, yes, he has, but it's not fit for purpose, and it's certainly not a stadium that allows the club to grow.
Yeah.
So I suppose what you want, if you're like, everybody knew this was coming, and I suppose the example of a positive separation of a benefactor in a club is, like, maybe Kelty, for example, because but to be fair, I remember doing a lower league preview podcast, and we discussed the fact that Kelty are now in League One, but over the summer they'd only signed, I think it was like they signed a couple of players for university football. And I think we mentioned at that point that maybe Dean McKenzie was maybe starting to lose a wee bit of interest in Kelty, and it felt like they had 12 months of him being around to get plans in place for that separation. And maybe if Queen's Park have these 14 months to put plans in place for the separation, then maybe they'll be fine. But I think there's always, maybe it's just it's because we've seen this kind of thing go so wrong so many times, you probably immediately leap to the worst case scenario. But maybe they'll be fine, but I suppose we don't know ultimately.
Yeah. It just feels strange, and because it was almost, and again, this is something they touched on, but this is something that got me thinking about. Do you remember when Willie Muir was an episode of View for the Terrace, He was Queen's Park goalkeeper at the time. I think won League Two Player of the Month, and we're pretty much okay to ask him friends. But I was told don't ask him about like the move, the transition, and where the money's coming from. It's almost like Willie Haughey's his presence was something everyone knew about it, but you weren't able to talk about it. And this is only really the first time where you're actually seeing his name properly associated with the club. And you just wondered, like, what was the mechanism? What was the membership scheme preventing him from doing? What did he want to do that he couldn't work around? And if that was the case, then why couldn't he just come and bid the club around? Why couldn't he become like the owner, the chairman of Queen's Park, rather than just a sort of background figure who is almost like, I don't want to use the term open secret because that sounds like it's nefarious, and I certainly don't want to mean that. But the idea that you couldn't really talk about what he was doing when everyone knew that was the case.
I suppose only he would know, but I don't think for a minute that he would give a kind of open interview about A, why he got involved, and B, why he left when he did. Yeah. I suspect that when Willie Haughey got involved at Queen's Park, he had an idea of what he wanted to do, and I think he's now probably achieved what he wanted to do. Like we've spoken about this. We've spoken about this in the past in terms of, as it stands, which organisation would be happier with Haughey's involvement at Queen's Park? Would it be Queen's Park or would it be the SFA?
Yeah,
and it's probably the SFA, and maybe that's enough for Haughey. We'll see what happens, whether he eventually gets a seat on the board at the SFA remains to be seen. But obviously Haughey's had enough. Why he's decided now is the time, only he knows, I suppose. Yeah,
I remember when we spoke about it in the context of Gretna, because that was certainly a comparison a lot of people were making. We're a small team who incidentally playing black and white as well, are at they've got someone who's putting money into the club and they can rise to this unnatural position relative to the size of the club and the amount of supporters they've got. We always said there was a bit of dubiety over Brooks Mileson's wealth, and we said we could never say the same about Willie Haughey. He's demonstrably a very wealthy man. However, I just don't think anyone expected him to finish like this.
No, you're right. But I think we knew it was going to finish. And I think, again, what has been so frustrating is it has been interesting in terms of Queen's Park fans have kind of generally been at best frustrated and at worst exasperated by what's been going on off the park. No matter how good it's been going on in the park, you can understand why. Like Lesser Hampden is dreadful. I think it's the worst stadium in Scotland, and the fact that a wealthy benefactor has spent so much money on such a dreadful stadium, like, is that by design, or is it that whoever's designed it and built it is inept?
That's an interesting point, Shaughan, because I think when I think of the worst stadium in Scotland, I think of Meadowbank.
I think Meadowbank's better.
However, I would say that there was without knowing all the ins and outs, it feels like they were frustrated by what Meadowbank was supposed to be. It's a multi-purpose ground for athletics with a football team that's attached to it. You're working with the council and the bureaucracy that comes along with that. I'm not sure if that was the case at Queen's Park.
Yeah.
If this is effectively just like a blank canvas to build what you want. And yeah, maybe you're right. In relative terms, that might be the worst, because you've got a stand. I've been in it a couple of times and watched Queen's Park in the SPFL Trust Trophy against Edinburgh and against East Kilbride, and it's not a great place to watch football. And it just feels like probably like a lot of the stuff that is just with Queen's Park over the past, since 2019, a missed opportunity.
Yeah, so you have that, and then I think the flip side, and again, Queen's Park fans have went on about it now for years, the lack of communication. Yeah. So I was trying to remember and as much as I'm laughing, again, if I was a Queen's Park fan, I'd be really annoyed. I can't remember something really bad had happened. It might have been something like, and I'm using this as an example, but it is a real example, but it might not be the example. It was, they'd sold season tickets for I think it was a championship season. I think they were quite expensive. Maybe their first season in the championship, quite expensive season tickets.
I remember that. Yeah, was this? Sorry, Shaughan. Was this when they weren't sure if the games were going to be on the Friday or the Saturday, and there was a lot of people unhappy saying, "Well, I work Fridays, so basically, I've given you this money." And
exactly that. So this might not be the precise example, but something bad had happened that the fans were really annoyed about. and there was no communication coming for the club. And then while all this was kind of circulating, they then put out something on social media that said, next Saturday is steak pie day. And it was like, no, this isn't. you have to communicate about this latest thing that everybody's worried about.
I remember that.
You can't tweet about steak pies. But it's kind of been like that, but less funny stuff for about 5 years. And again, it's like how can you be getting this so wrong? And this has been the situation throughout Haughey's tenure in charge of the club. It's been off the park. It's been pretty poor.
Yeah, and to talk about, if we want to turn attention to stuff that's going on the park, watched the highlights from the game against Livingston. Not fantastic. I think everyone expected them to lose, but I was in attendance for the game against Livingston last Wednesday. I don't want to get too carried away, but I think pound for pound, not even pound for pound, probably in both in absolute and relative terms, I think that's the worst performance I've seen from a team in a long time. On the big screens at Hampden, they played the pre-match interviews with Stephen McLean. I think Roddy McGregor was the other one. And the interviewer asked him, he said, obviously, disappointing result against Livingston. Can we use that as motivation to bounce back this game against Airdrieonians? Absolutely, you have to do it. You have to do that. That's to use your disappointments to tee you up. And about the first 60 seconds or so, Queen's Park snapped into a couple of tackles. And you're thinking, well, that's good. They've got a wee bit of fire in their belly. But I'm not exaggeration, from about minute 3 or 4, once Airdrie settled into their groove, that was it. And they opened the scoring from a corner. And you just think, well, Queen's Park don't come back from goals. I think it's twice in the last 3 years or something, a ridiculous stat like that they don't come back when they go goals down. Rico Dyack scores a free kick. Mason Hancock dribbles past about 3 players. You've probably seen the goal where Zach Rudden loses possession and slumps down, and then Airdrie go up and score. And Chris Mockery scored a really nice goal for goal number 5. And I just think that they're not going to win a game between now and the end of the season. They've also got a huge game against Dunfermline on Saturday. It's going to have massive ramifications at the foot of the table. And as bad as Dunfermline are, and the stat that they scored 1 league goal in 2025 that wasn't scored by Chris Kane. I think it was Otto against Hamilton. No, against who was it against Ayr when they beat Ayr 1-0. Other than that, they just don't score goals. So it's like this is imagine like a bare ice lolly that's been left out in the sun. That's what I imagine this game's going to be like. Where this cartoon ice lolly's been left out in the sun, it's all melted, and the bear's got a smile on its face, but it's just melting into the pavement. That's what I imagine this game's going to be like. And I can't see Queen's Park winning a game between now and the end of the season. Airdrie, who we're going to come on and talk about, you can feasibly see them staying up now with this sort of form they've put together. But there's a lot of badness down there, and there's only really one team that look as though they're up for it, and that's the team that's bottom of the table. So I really hope that Queen's Park's future becomes clear, that the players who are without clubs can get picked up soon. I hope the senior players can resolve their futures, the coaches that might lose their jobs, I hope that gets sorted out. And I hope obviously the fans as well just have a club to support at a level. We've spoken about it a lot in this podcast, Shaughan. See, having a team you can be proud of supporting. Mm-hmm. I think that's really important. It doesn't really matter what levels that at. And I don't think that's really been the case with Queen's Park for you won't say a long time, because they had that win against Rangers, which is absolutely incredible. I don't say, but a couple of months now, certainly, where it's been pretty bad.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the first 4 months of this season, then the kind of first part of their first season in the Championship. Other than that, it's probably been a bit of a drag now over the last kind of 2 or 3 years. So you're right. Fingers crossed they come out of this in a decent place. I would be surprised if they can sustain being a Championship club. But do you know something? To be fair, when they voted to I suppose move away from an amateur status, it wasn't. I suppose they didn't vote for this model. They just voted to become a kind of professional or semi-professional club. So hopefully they'll be absolutely fine after this. It might not be the worst thing for Haughey to move on. We'll find out though.
Like that Simpsons. Oh, so you want to be a professional club, do you? We'll have all the professional clubs in the world. And then just get fed donuts over and over again. That's right. I think it's like being turbocharged. Like, you ever seen Street Fighter the movie when they make Blanca and they basically put him in this pod and just like play violent movies and pump him full of steroids?
Is that the one with Kylie Minogue?
Yes.
Is there? So I've not seen the film all the way through.
Oh.
Is there a scene where somebody uses a bazooka? Somebody in a boat and they use a bazooka?
I think so.
Right, I think that's about. I've seen about 15 seconds. That was enough, if I'm being totally honest.
Dear listener, if you've seen Street Fighter the movie and you know the scene that I am referencing, please let me know. So I'm just talking here like an arsehole, and Shaughan's just like kindly nodding away to me. So but Shaughan, we'll move away from Queen's Park, but we'll move over to the teams that Queen's Park played on Wednesday. And this is Airdrieonians in their match against Partick Thistle, a 2-1 win over the Jags, with Chris Mulgrew, the hero of the day, put the Diamonds ahead early on in the second half. And although Ben Stanway got a late equaliser, Mulgrew got the winner in the 90th minute. 2 excellent victories for the Diamonds last week, and although they're still bottom of the table, they're now 3 points from Dunfermline Athletic in 9th. And just to highlight how incredible achievement that is, see if you go back to this time in January, they were 13 points adrift, certainties to go down. So this is incredible that we're at this stage of the season, 4 games to go, and they can stay up. And Partick Thistle, meanwhile, they still hold that final promotion playoff spot, but Raith Rovers are sneaking right up behind them. Shaughan, give me a shoot thoughts on Airdrieonians 2, Partick Thistle 1.
I quite enjoyed this from a neutral / Raith Rovers perspective. It was probably like the best result in terms of keeping things interesting for top 4, and at the bottom end of the table, it kind of feels like there's now 4 teams involved in the relegation tussle. See, in terms of keeping Airdrie up, I had a wee look back. I wrote something for the Raith Rovers programme for this week. I've mentioned it before. I'm not overly keen on the term Great Escape, because not many prisoners actually managed to escape in that film. I hope that's not a spoiler, but the film has been around for 63 years. But nevertheless,
I've never seen it.
You're too busy watching I don't know, Badil Syndrome.
Shaughan, I like having a laugh, but don't make fun of Badil Syndrome. Come on. Right, anyway, sorry, please continue your point.
I do think if Airdrie stay up, this might be the greatest of great escapes. And in terms of the championship, you could go to, remember that Dumbarton team from about 2012 that didn't win a game until November?
Yeah, the 2012, that was Ian Murray's team.
Yeah, but they were never cut adrift. So they looked terrible, but they were never cut adrift. And then the St Mirren side that stayed up under
Jack Ross.
So they were, I think at one point they were 11 points, maybe slightly more in terms of away from safety. Then on the last day of the season, managed to end up finishing 7th. So if Airdrie do manage to stay up, this would be probably the best escape, certainly of the last kind of 20 years or so. I'm sure Craig Anderson could tell us how it, where it is on the Great Escapeometer. But regardless, I wouldn't be surprised if they do it. Like, certainly in terms of this week, there is the fact that they're playing Raith Rovers, the fact that there's a lot of good stuff that the Rovers have tried to do over the last couple of seasons, whether it's win the league, whether it's try and get to the Challenge Cup final. It's generally Airdrie that managed to stop them. So try and get in the playoffs. I wouldn't be surprised if Airdrie deny them that this season. But even if Airdrie don't beat Raith this weekend, I think the fixtures they've got left, I would fancy them to get a number of points from them. So although I was doubtful and dubious based on the performance at the weekend, I thought they probably deserved this win over the Jags. So I really impressed by them. I agree with a lot of stuff that you're saying. I think this would be absolutely remarkable if they were to pull this. It almost feels like a heist than anything else. Just how ludicrous it is. It's like something at Ocean's 11. Just how grand a plan this is to stay up. And I suppose in some ways it's vindication for the club for sticking by Rhys McCabe, because I'm sure there's a lot of times that Diamonds fans were
we're just thinking, you know what, it's not worked. Blaming Concilium Sports, and there's probably still a case to answer for that, because because if you do stay up, it doesn't mean that the journey getting there was totally impressive. There's still probably perhaps a lot of question marks to ask about that. But I think it's vindication for Rhys McCabe for sticking to his principles, believing believing the right way to play football, or believe what he thinks is the right way to play football. Sticking by him, knowing that there was so many injuries in the team, like 8 or 9 good players out at one point, makeshift defences, young players perhaps playing a lot earlier than they would want to be, guys who are perhaps overloaded with fixtures that shouldn't have been. And now that injury list is abated and McCabe can get something close to his best 11 out there, they looked really good. They were excellent against Queen's Park. I know you can only beat what's in front of you, but they looked really good just in terms of keeping the ball and how they moved into the final third, and getting to see Mason Hancock, like the first time in a long time I'd actually seen him in the flesh. He's superb, man. He was really, really good in that game. Really, really good. And I think, so I'm speaking for a long time here, but if there's an example of just that confidence in Airdrie at the moment, it's Mulgrew's second goal, because that's in the 89th minute into the 90th minute. It starts with a header cleared off the line, and then it's played out of defence. The ball's booted up the park down the line, and then somehow worked through to Mulgrew, who's got a clean sight and goal, and shoots. And it's brilliant. The celebrations when he runs over to the stand, and everyone, that run that people do, it's like a kind of a waddle like that. You're walking down the steps, and your wee arms are going, and you don't want to fall over, but you just want to. You're so excited, you just want to go down and celebrate the players, and there's somebody jumps over the wall to come in and celebrate them. That's fantastic. And that moment, I think, just sums up what Rhys McCabe's managed to do, and how they have managed to, play their way out a difficult situation.
Yeah, I think there's probably been 2 lines of thought when it comes to Airdrie. That from Airdrie fans, I hasten to add, certainly in terms of Pie and Bovril, which has been the summer transfer window was dreadful, and that's why they're one of the main reasons that they're in the position that they were in. And the other, I suppose, more positive, sticking up for Rhys McCabe situation was, we've had lots of injuries. So what can you expect? I suspect both things are true. Like, yes, lots of players that were injured are coming back. Mason Hancock, you're right, again, looks like the player that we saw last season, I suppose. But I think without Alex Bannon, who came in January, to a lesser degree, like Lewis Strapp, who came in January, has kind of been in and out of the team due to injury, but again has been good when he's been there. So they've had a good January window with players returning. I still think their summer transfer window was really poor. But regardless, in terms of Rhys McCabe, it does feel like he's went from being somebody who would probably be sought after to somebody that's like, his career, interesting to see where he goes from here.
Yeah.
To, my goodness, if he keeps Airdrie up, then again, he becomes very, very sought after.
Oh, I think so. I mean, there was points as well where I'm sure we've discussed in the past that they're saying, it might have been the best thing for him if he was to have left the club. And in the summer, like you get a decision where, like, this is as far as I can take Airdrie, I'm going to go elsewhere. But the fact that he is stuck around with them, I think that this makes him look even better. If he can, if they can, I think if they finish in 9th, they'll beat the teams from League One. I think if they finish in 9th, they'll stay up, and also there's still a long way to go. But I think this makes him look even better if he can somehow pull the team out of this position. But from the 4 teams that are involved in the bottom, they're the ones that look like they're having the most fun. They still look like a really principled, confident bunch of players and really believe in what they're doing. And if you compare it to the other teams, there's Queen's Park, who we've just spoken about, and just saying that a massive injury list, and the guys that come in just look completely bereft of confidence. You've got Hamilton, who are much lesser than the sum of their parts, and a fan base who really don't like the manager and don't like the director of football and just don't like the direction the club's going in. And you've got Dunfermline, where there's perhaps a lot of distrust to perhaps the hierarchy, particularly over the Michael Tidser incident, like bringing him in and getting rid of him after 2 months. And I think from Neil Lennon, yes, he got the win against Ayr United. We've not really seen. It wasn't Ayr United. They lost to Ayr United. Who am I talking about that they played against and beat 1-0?
It was Livingston.
Livingston, fucking hell. I'm so sorry, listener. There's probably somebody who's listening to this back saying, it wasn't Ayr, they lost to Ayr. That's when Wanyama was sent off. That's when you spoke about that in last week's podcast. So I'm really sorry. Livingston, they beat 1-0, you and O2 scoring. I'm really, really sorry. Just pennies just dropped right there. But that's I suppose Lennon is the sort of character who can give you that new manager bounce, albeit we haven't really seen much of it. So Airdrie just feel like emotionally, physically, tactically, confidence-wise, just in the best place compared to those other teams.
Yeah, very much so. It feels like they are the team with confidence. You're absolutely right. I don't know if you watched. I'm kind of going off the track here. Did you see Rhys McCabe's post-match interview?
No, I didn't get a chance to see it.
Right, okay. By all means, go and have a wee look back, because after 2 minutes, he gives somebody a row.
Does he?
He gives somebody off-screen a row. So they're doing the interview, and then somebody off-screen is making a noise. I don't know what the noise is. Somebody is maybe bouncing a ball. I don't know. I don't know if McCabe's a father, maybe takes his child to the game. But basically, he breaks off the interview, turns to his left and right and said, "Stop doing that, please." But it very much feels like he's talking to a child rather than maybe like another adult. I don't know. It's just a weird element of the interview. But regardless, you're right. There is a resurgence and a confidence, and I don't know, just a positivity about Airdrie that nobody else in that bottom four has about them. And I always thought that they've just given themselves too much to do. I think it was 6 points for the first 20 games, and now they've taken, I think it's 21 points for the last 12, something along those lines. If they keep that up, then they might not even finish in the bottom two positions. Yeah,
that's right. And it just shows that we're later on, we're going to come and talk about a manager sticking to his principles and it not working out, whereas McCabe sometimes it just works for you. And then these are the sort of narratives you can say that stuck to his principles is the right thing to do. Another manager sticks to his principles. You need to change what you want to do, to accommodate the circumstances. So it's brave. It's a really brave thing to do. And I think that with Airdrie, and again, spoken at this in the past, Airdrie are a club where I think you're perhaps given more time at Airdrie than you would be at other clubs. So that's definitely something McCabe had to his benefit. And maybe McCabe was aware of that. Maybe he had conversations with the people who are running the club, and them saying, listen, if you go down, we'll give you everything you need to help you come straight back up. Your position's secure, so you can be like, well, I am going to stick to my principles. I don't know if that was the case. I'm going to, from what I've heard about Airdrie, I'm going to take that to be the case. But sorry, on you go.
I was going to say, quite possibly, I do wonder though if he might leave the club at the end of this season.
Something because Ian Barraclough coming in as new director of football at Partick Thistle, you might look at Rhys McCabe and be like, this is the guy I think would do us a really good turn here.
But potentially. And the reason I maybe think that is I had it in my head that if Partick Thistle qualify for the top four, get to the playoffs, and have a kind of half-decent fist at it, even if they lost in the quarterfinals but done okay, then Graham might get that job permanently. However, the fact that Barraclough comes in, as far as I'm aware, it's not like him and Graham don't have any previous relationship, so I do wonder if Graham getting the job now becomes slightly less
clear cut.
Yes, now that Barraclough's there, I suppose.
Yeah, you could be right. You could be right. But one player, just to finish up talking about Airdrie, I think one player who we really have to highlight is Chris Mulgrew. We mentioned about his second goals. I loved his first goal as well. What I really liked about it, I think it's Liam McStravick does a lot of the good work, and I really like it where the assister celebrates more than the person that scored the goal. And what I loved about, he runs away to celebrate like he scored. And sort of Mulgrew chases after him, and the players they're both in two little pockets, one celebrating with Mulgrew, one celebrating with McStravick. And it's great to see, because I think that Mulgrew, when he was coming through at Dundee United, and particularly when he had that loan spell at Montrose, pretty similar to Declan Glass. You're looking at the guy and thinking, this guy's got a really good chance of making a name for himself at Tannadice. Like he's got the skill set, Here he's playing at a level perhaps beneath himself to toughen up, get used to men's football, and he can go back to Tannadice and really make a success of himself. And unfortunately, I think his injuries really that curtailed him. I don't think his talent's ever been in doubt. But to see him thriving, I mean, the goal he scored against Queen's Park was fantastic. Great team goal. And the 2 goals here, I mean, one was from about 6 yards out and it was melted. But the other one, that one in the 90th minute to win the game, really, really composed, because it'd be really easy to panic. It really just put the laces through it and shoot it straight to the goalkeeper. But it's quite a measured shot to win the team the match. So it's great to see him doing well. And it's great to see these players who have, come with a lot of promise, perhaps lost their way a little bit for whatever reason, but are able to rebuild again. These are the guys that I really like, and these are the guys I really like talking about.
So it's funny you should mention him, but McCabe was, again, his post-match interview was asked about Chris Mulgrew, because he has been probably more kind of out the team than in the team, and even when he's been in the team this season, he hasn't performed particularly well. But you're right, he has impressed up until this season at moments. And he said, Mulgrew was kind of chapping on my door on Wednesday and asking, or maybe Tuesday, asking why he wasn't getting a game, why he wasn't in the team. And I just said to him, he goes, look, trust me. He goes, I'll bring you on at Hampden. I'll bring you on against Queen's Park. He goes, I think you'll score, and then I need you to lead the line against Partick Thistle. And I think you'll do great. Now maybe exaggerated, I don't know, but the fact that he did come on against Hampden, score a goal, and then lead the line against Partick Thistle because
Wilson
couldn't play.
Yeah, of course,
because he's on loan from Thistle. Fair play, but that wasn't a position that he is used to. He hasn't had a great season. But it looked like he had a brilliant game on Saturday and two excellent finishes.
Yeah. Anything to be said about Partick Thistle?
An interesting team. I think that they, like Graham talks about the fact that there's a bit more togetherness now. I do think that they defend a wee bit better as a team. I'm not entirely sure they create too many chances. They're certainly not that adept at goal scoring. It's interesting that when Doolin was let go, they were 4 points clear of fifth place. They're now only 3 points clear. And as much as I think there is a slight improvement, it's not a huge improvement. I still think they'll get there. I think as long as Thistle continue to do the things that they're good at, which is defend, I think they still try and hurt teams how they've always tried to hurt teams over the last couple of years, and that's from their wide areas. The problem is, in their wide areas, they now have far inferior players. Like you think back, like McMillan, Harry Milne, Scott Tiffany. These guys have all left, and with the exception of Logan Chalmers, who I really like, everybody else in those positions is probably a wee bit worse. But we never talk about, when we talk about Thistle and how they can hurt teams, we talk about Graham and we talk about wide players. We never talk about the guys in the middle of the park. So they just are, I suppose, an inferior side. But I think as long as they defend well, they'll end up fourth. But I don't see them getting promoted. But regardless, it probably still is an acceptable season considering the makeup of the squad, I suppose.
I didn't get the chance to read it because it was behind a paywall, but I think it was James Kearney, who writes about Partick Thistle for the Herald, had interviewed Chris Doolin, and I think it was his first big interview that he gave after leaving the club. And I think that when Brian Graham had taken charge, he perhaps mentioned that the players weren't particularly fit or something along those lines. So it'd be interesting to know more about his thoughts. I always think that when a new manager takes charge of a team, fitness is always something that's criticised of the players if they don't get off to a good start, which obviously reflects badly on the previous manager.
It always just feels like a very vague thing that a manager can say, I will fix this instantly, rather than some kind of tactical deficiency or squad deficiency that's that much more difficult to fix, I suppose.
It's like Donald Trump saying he could fix the Ukraine war in 24 hours. Still waiting. I suppose he's got bigger problems at the moment than the Ukraine war. We mentioned Shaughan, Raith Rovers versus Airdrie coming up next.
Something, Raith are 6 games unbeaten. I would like to think that they could get a win here.
But it's Airdrie.
Therefore, I think the last 5 or 6 games in this fixture has been 1-0 to the home team. So let's just say 1-0 Wraith due to a trend.
Imagine they remade Chinatown, but it was about Wraith Rovers, and the final was like, forget it, Jake, it's Airdrieonians, something like that, in a slightly worse Los Angeles accent than that. Also, Partick Thistle versus Hamilton Accies.
Surely Partick will get at least something from that. As much as Hamilton were, I disagreed with Neil Lennon at the weekend. I didn't think they were necessarily dominant. I thought Hamilton had good chances as well. But regardless, I would still expect Thistle to win that.
And if you want to hear more about Wraith Rovers' promotion chances and how their season is going, Shaughan and I, when we finish up, are recording a special episode for the Terrace Podcast Patreon. Please head over there as soon as we're done. More details about that will follow shortly. But the long and short of it is, get your checkbook out, give us your money. Quoting Bob Geldof there, Live Aid from 1984. So that's one for the kids.
I'm sure he banged a table as he said it.
I'm not going to bang a table. That's terrible audio. No one needs to hear something being banged in their ears. Anyway, we'll wander into League One and we'll probably talk about one of the most remarkable results of the season. This is Kelty Hearts 0, Dumbarton 6. The biggest, I know it's astonishing, the biggest win by an already relegated side in the history of the Scottish League. Absolutely incredible. 6 different scorers for the Suns as well. Joel Mbongo, Calvin Orsi, Carlo Pignatello, Michael Ruth, Matty Shields, although that one just hit off his backside, so I don't know if that one really counts, and Craig McGuffey. And the result doesn't change Dumbarton's circumstances. They are going to finish the season in 10th. But Kelty Hearts face a bit of a nervous month. They're now in 7th place and only 4 points from Annan Athletic in the relegation playoff place. And the big news coming from New Central Park on Tuesday was that Charlie Mulgrew tendered his resignation. His record with the club, pretty dismal. 11 games, 1 win, 3 draws, 7 defeats, just 4 goals from his 11 matches there. And I suppose that's where we really have to start, because that's where the big news is. Shaughan, what do you make of Charlie Mulgrew departing from Kelty Hearts?
Yeah, when this result was coming through, see when I got to like 5, and then ultimately 6, I was like, oh, this is such a bad result that potentially it is a result that might force a manager out. I wasn't sure what Kelty's situation was, if they were in a position financially to maybe ask Mulgrew to leave the club. It sounds like, judging by the kind of noises coming from the kind of statement, that was it mutual, or was it that Mulgrew approached him? Tendered his resignation. Well, he does him a fair play, and I think that let's face it wasn't working out, and I do wonder, like we've kind of. Have we slagged off Barry Ferguson in the past in terms of the fact that he's spoken about that when he was at Alloa or Clyde, for example, that he couldn't get the players to do what he wanted? And there might be something in that, but I don't mean that. But I think when Ferguson said it was almost like he was trying to mitigate responsibility. It's not my fault. And maybe there is something in that. But ultimately, if Mulgrew and Barry Ferguson, who I've mentioned there, like if they can't, I suppose, articulate what they need the players to do, then that looks bad on them. Like it isn't the fault of the squad. But let's face it, it wasn't working out. And I suppose this gives Kelty a good chance of staying up, because I do think if he'd stuck around, then they might have finished ninth.
Yeah, I think so. I've got a degree of respect for Charlie Mulgrew for acknowledging that it's just not working.
Yeah.
Because I think that's if something's going badly and you've got that pride and that ambition, perhaps the ego as well, to think that I just need one game, I just need to sort out. It's Inverness Cali Thistle, so that's going to be up next, so that's going to be a tough match. But I need that game to where we can get back in the training ground on Tuesday and Thursday. I can spend the rest of the week coming up with a plan and getting the players to execute it. But just getting to the stage where you just think, I am not the man that is able to do this. I don't think I can get the best out of these players. I need to go elsewhere for the good of the club, for the good of myself. That takes some doing. So you perhaps got to respect the man for just being like, yep, I'm walking away from this situation. But I just felt as though that we talked about Rhys McCabe and that perhaps the contrast about sticking with your principles. And it felt as though that Mulgrew coming into the club, McCabe had been there a while, and he had a number of players that have been on the journey with him from League One into the Championship and know what to expect from him. From McCabe from Mulgrew to come in there and take what Tidser was doing, but sort of make a worse version of that. I don't understand why you'd want to do that. I saw them when Stennismuir drew 0-0 with them a couple of weeks ago, and that, in hindsight, that doesn't reflect well on Stennismuir, the fact that we drew with them. But I think they're probably the most boring team to watch in League One at the moment, and certainly I wouldn't have said that at the beginning of the season, because I thought Michael Tidzer's version of them were pretty good, quite dynamic, especially in the middle of the park. But what I mean by when I say they're the most boring, just they're quite happy to keep the ball. Like almost feels like a training exercise, and when the ball gets worked into the final third, there's not much penetration there at all. But as long as they still have possession, that's perhaps the most important thing. Almost, it felt as though that I remember watching his post-match interview and thinking he was really pleased with his team, and it felt as though that I wouldn't have been pleased with that.
Yeah,
it almost felt like results were secondary, and I know that's not the case, but that's certainly what it felt like. You're too principled in how you want the team to play, and it's good to be idealistic. There has to be a degree of pragmatism as well that comes into it, especially when you're dealing with players from League One, because for the best will in the world, you might want your team to play this high-octane attacking football, but there's a reason, and no disrespect to them, but there's a reason guys are playing League One football. And it's because they're good, but they're not consistent enough, or they're not good enough, or they're not technical enough, or they're not fit enough. There's some deficiency that means they're not playing at a higher level. And so you work with that and try to find out the best system for them. And I don't think that he was able to do that.
It was probably the worst possible time to join Kelty. So I know Tidser was player manager, and he hadn't played in too many games, to be fair. But he was still a very good player. So he'd left the club. Then is it Samuel Cleal Harding?
Yes, I went back to Dundee United. So he's playing for them. That's good that he's actually playing for them. And so it speaks well for a team like Kelty that these guys can come in on loan and then then return to the parent clubs and be ready to play first team football.
And then was it Williamson that left and then went to Clyde?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'm...
Which felt like a strange one.
I might need to be corrected here, but I think that I don't think that was Williamson's decision to leave Kelty. I think that might have been Mulgrew didn't fancy him and basically sent him back to Queen's Park, and then obviously Queen's Park let him go and he goes to Clyde.
But so my thoughts at the time were, right, Mulgrew's going in at Kelty. Even if he doesn't hit the ground running, they're in such a good position that they'll be, let's say they finish mid-table, that gives him a chance to get his feet under the table, then he gets a summer transfer window, then the squad is his. But it felt like the squad immediately became weaker, and then he just struggled to get his ideas or kind of tactics embed into the squad, and ultimately, you're right, absolutely nothing was working, and maybe it would have done eventually, but I in terms of the McCabe scenario that you've explained, but I sincerely doubt it.
I mean, I think that with Airdrie, it was like, well, we're bottom of the table, we're probably going to get relegated, but I don't think in a million years anyone would have Kelty Hearts as relegation favourites. Particularly, I think when he took charge of the club, they were in third place.
Yeah.
And to have picked up 6 points since then is just not really good enough. And I text Fraser Clark after the match because I was astounded. Fraser Clark obviously is our friend who's a Dumbarton fan, regularly appears or semi-regularly appears in the terrace. And I texted him just like, what on earth happened at the match? And he just said it was incredible. It was like Dumbarton were absolutely fantastic. And sorry, Dumbarton fans that were spending more time talking about how bad Kelty were here. But as good as Dumbarton were, Kelty were really bad. And he said the older, more experienced players were getting on at the younger guys, and the younger guys were just going into their shell. And it was easy for Dumbarton, who, it might be a bit different. They're just playing because they know that it's the end of the season for them. They can just enjoy themselves. They're completely uninhibited, so they can do what they want. I mean, Joe Mbongo scored in that, for God's sake. That's just how bad things were for Kelty. But it just suggests that it's not a particularly good place when you hear those kind of things about players bickering with each other and young guys terrified of being passed the ball. It just sounds like something's not good, not right there. And for whatever Mulgrew, it's the manager's job to create like a harmonious atmosphere. Whether or not he was able to do that doesn't seem like it was the case. So just an appointment that hasn't worked out. And there's the two appointments that ultimately Tids are moving to Dunfermline didn't work out. Mulgrew moving to Kelty Hearts didn't work out. But I could never have foreseen it being 2 months at Dunfermline and just under 3 months at Kelty. Yeah.
That was interesting in terms of the highlights where... So the camera angle seemed to be in a much worse position than normal. Then the commentator, and I presume he had audio issues, but the longer the game went and the more goals that Kelty conceded, the less his commentary was included. So he kind of went from describing the goals to then saying it's 4-0 to Barton, to just not saying anything about 5 and 6. But the body language of the players, funnily enough, it might have been the 4th or 5th goal, but just where the camera was, there was maybe half the Kelty team was reasonably close to the camera, and they all just kind of sunk to their haunches. Like there was a real, in terms of body language, it felt like they'd not given up, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you talk about the match highlights. It felt as though they were being filmed undercover. Like the guy filming them went to do an expose with Donald McIntyre and conservatories or something, and that's he had a camera pinned to his lapel, and that's what the match was being filmed on. Because it was
really good. That guy Kelty Hearts are not really good. I don't know why they were slightly different at the weekend. I did find it funny that again, maybe it's to do with his audio issues, but it did feel like the commentator had literally just given up after about 55 minutes.
He just left. He just put his jacket down in a heap and just left. Yeah, it was a shame, because I think that I think a lot of people would have thought that, who watch lower league football, of all the games this weekend, this was perhaps the one they were most looking forward to watching, because it's 6-0 from a team that's already relegated against a hitherto stable enough, like mid-table club or upwardly looking club. But that's simply not the case. So I disappoint him, but having a bit of a laugh. Don't want to get on too heavy on volunteers, because it's a thankless task. But for Kelty, I suppose the big question is who comes in to replace Mulgrew, and I suppose that providing there's no bad blood there over his departure to Dunfermline, that Michael Tidser seems the most obvious appointment to give it to.
It's an obvious one, but then I suppose it felt like he went on gardening leave for about 2 weeks. It felt like that whole negotiation was quite difficult. I suppose we don't know why it was protracted and quite so difficult, but if there was no, I suppose, bad blood from either side when it comes to Kelty or Tidser, then yes, I would expect them to be back soon.
Yeah, it's what the state of play is like. But there's no shame in that. Tidser's Kelty were a good side, and I think it helped the fact that he was playing for them and was able to give them that leadership and guidance in the middle of the park and add something into the midfield that they don't have. I mean, Liam Brown's playing there, and it's great seeing him playing after being such a long time injured. But I do think he needs legs beside him, and I think Tidser's maybe perhaps not the most mobile player, but Tidser can give the side that ballast, and he did. He was a right good player for them. So you get Tidser back in, that's two good things, because you've got a player and you've got a manager. Although I don't think if say he was to come in time for the weekend's match, I don't think he's able to play for them due to registration and stuff like that.
I'm not sure how it works. He'd probably have to be a free agent by the end of the window, so I don't know if he could play for them at all this season. Yeah, not sure.
But certainly having him back, you'd imagine, might have some kind of galvanising effect. But given it's the 4 points, you would never, if you'd have gone back to January and said that in 3 months' time they're going to be just 4 points from Annan in ninth, I wouldn't have believed it. Something bad would have had to happen.
And I suppose something bad has happened. However, 4 points above Annan with just 4 games to go, that still feels like that's a big gap. I still fancy them to be fine.
Yeah, it's just with Annan though, Annan are perhaps any time you've written Annan off this season, and Lord knows I've written Annan off a number of times this season, they always just seem to dig out a result. They always seem to just dig out a win. It's any time you think Willie Gibson's done for, they just get a result. And it's allowed them to keep pace with Cali Thistle at the bottom of the table. So I wouldn't rule anything out yet. I wouldn't rule anything out yet at the bottom of the division.
Not at all bad. However, I do think Kelty will just about shuffle away to safety.
And I hope that Mulgrew as well is a period of introspection. I mean, I saw him he was on Premier Sports the following day, and he didn't look like he was particularly enjoying himself. I'd imagine that's because if you have something bad's going on in your work, it's quite easy for allow that to creep into other aspects of your life if you're worried about something, and maybe he was. But you'd like to think that there is still, if he does harbour ambitions, like anyone else that's been in a job for a short period of time and it hasn't worked out, if you do still harbour ambitions, you can go away and have that degree of introspection and work out how and why things went badly. you don't want them to be in a position saying, "Oh, the players weren't good enough for what I wanted to do with them." You want to think, well, then if they're not good enough, then why not simplify it and make it easier for them to try and understand what it is you do want to do? You've only got 2 nights with them. I'm going to assume that Mulgrew is wealthy enough, because he played for some pretty big teams during his playing career, that he is wealthy enough where he doesn't need a second job, that he can go away and work on tactics and strategies and coaching and watch the videos back and teach the players how to get better, and how to, similar to we spoke about Michael McIndoe at Edinburgh. I always have to get Michael McIndoe into a Lower League podcast. But remember when they lost to East Fife, they had a bit of collapse. And rather than being angry with his players, he was like, we will coach them to be better so these mistakes don't happen again. You would hope that that's what he's able to do. It'll be interesting. I'm sure he'll be on, for instance, like Open Goal or something like that, where they'll ask him about it, and I'll be interested to see what he says if he's asked about his time at Kelty. But that's something you always hope for: introspection, work out what went wrong, and make sure it doesn't happen again if you do go into management. But Dumbarton, Shaughan, anything to be said about them? Quite again, going by the highlights, quite difficult to tell how well the game was played. But certainly, going by from what the conversation Fraser Clark and I had, he was absolutely delighted with the team. And fair play, that's 2 wins on the bounce, which is just great stuff. And I think that if you're going to finish the season with a relegation, at least send them up the road with a smile.
I was pleased for them. I was pleased for the players, pleased for their fans and Fraser. Excuse me. I do wonder if this means that Stevie Farrell will probably get kept around next season. Like, obviously we don't know what's going to happen in terms of ownership, and I do wonder if a strong end to the season, which it feels like that's going to happen, might give Farrell another opportunity next season, either to keep them in the division, depending on what their punishment is, if there is a punishment, or to try and get them out of League Two. Again, whether the Dumbarton fans want him to stick around, I'm not so sure, but I think a strong end to the campaign will potentially keep him around.
Yeah, I think the perhaps the disappointment with Farrell was that when they had the points deduction, and it was just a case of you just need to go for it. And some of these games, you need to go for it. I don't think they ever did. They were perhaps a wee bit too cautious. And I'm not saying that you should start every game by playing like 5 strikers or anything like that, like some weird football manager tactic, because real football doesn't work like that. But just perhaps not showing a degree of ambition that you might need when it's balls out the barrel, go get the wins. I think it was when they lost to Annan. There was a period they lost to Annan, and that was the game. If they were going to overcome the deficit, that was the game they needed. That felt like a really early season 6-pointer. They didn't do it, and it felt as though their fate was sealed at that point. So, I mean, Farrell's, something I think that Farrell will never be the most popular man at Dumbarton. Whether or not he stays on, whether the club want a clean slate, it sounds like he if depending on the situation, like he would stay with the club, but perhaps that's not his decision to make.
Agreed. But I suppose if you're a new owner and you see a manager that's got them to the playoffs and got them promoted, then maybe it feels like an easy decision to make. So we'll see.
Yeah. Cali Thistle versus Kelty coming up next.
Cali Thistle.
Okay, and it's Dumbarton versus Cove Rangers.
Based on Dumbarton's form and the fact that Cove are just weird, I am going to say a Dumbarton home.
Yeah, I'm going for a score draw for this one, of course, because the big game of the weekend is Arbroath versus Stennismuir up at Gayfield. It's on at 5:30 in the television. Arbroath just need a point, really, and they've won the league. So the best, even if they lose, or even if they don't win and Cove don't win, then it's pretty much over and done with. In fact, Stennismuir win, that goes to 8 points. They're running out of time. I think it's a matter of time before Arbroath win. I think the permutations, I mean, there's some that would stop them from winning it on Saturday if Stenny get the win, but very hard to. I think, Shaughan, when you and I meet up next week, I think we'll be having a big toast to the new League One champions.
I think so too. But good luck with that.
Yes, definitely. Come on, the Stenny. We'll drop into League Two. We'll finish up by discussing the big game at Balmoor where Peterhead took on Bonnyrigg Rose. It was top versus bottom, and as you might have expected, the Blue Toons scooshed this, winning 5-0. Oliver Colletti scored a hat-trick. He is the first New Zealander to ever score a hat-trick in Scottish football. And Dylan Forrest and Adam Carmer completed the rout. And with East Fife losing at Forfar Athletic, Peterhead have managed to open up a 4-point advantage at the top of the division. Bonnyrigg, meanwhile, found themselves well and truly adrift at the foot of the table. They're now 6 points from Forfar Athletic in ninth. And just to highlight how stinking Bonnyrigg have been, go back to mid-February, Forfar were 10 games behind them, albeit with 2 games in hand. Since then, the Loons have taken 17 points. Bonnyrigg have taken just 1. Dismal stuff by the Rose. And if there's if there's ever a performance that encapsulated just how bad they were, it's this. But we'll get Peterhead out the way because nobody's interested in talking about a good team. Peterhead. No, listen, everyone wants to be. We just talked about a team that won 6-0 and spent about 60 seconds talking about them. Spent about 20 minutes talking about the team that lost. But I suppose for this one, we're being a bit facetious here. Peterhead, you and I would have seen them with along with the rest of the Terrace guys. We were at hospitality for Stirling Albion and Peterhead a couple of weeks ago. Peterhead are really good team to watch. I really enjoyed that afternoon, and I think that despite going a goal down early doors, I mean, they equalised straight away. They were by far and away the better team, and I think what we saw there, Stirling Albion are a much better side than Bonnyrigg. What we saw there in terms of that free-flowing, attacking play with Dylan Forrest in the midfield, just knitting things together. Max Barry, Kieran Dunn on the wings offering so much penetration, quality and attack there. And we basically saw this, but this was like a turbocharged version of it against Bonnyrigg here because, well, Bonnyrigg were really bad. But Peterhead are a good side.
Yeah, totally. And as much as Bonnyrigg were poor, you're right, Peterhead were really good here and could easily have won by more, like 6, 7, 8. It was quite funny. I thought it might be the most diverse range of accents I've ever heard from a club post-match. So you had Oliver Quality, who is from New Zealand. Mm-hmm. So he scored the hat-trick. His stats actually really good. He hasn't started too many games, but now has 5 goals for the club. So he's from New Zealand. Adam Carnworth, I think his name is, young guy on loan from Dundee United. He sounded like he was from Glasgow. And then Danny Strachan, who sounded like, I don't know where he's from exactly, but he sounded like he was from the very, very, very north of Scotland. So a really diverse 3 accents in terms of the post-game interviews. I enjoyed that. But could have been 6 or 7. So yes, lot to admire about Peterhead. I still think they have a more difficult run in than East Fife, as much as I do expect them to win the league. But I suppose you're right in terms of the bigger discussion point is the fact that Bonnyrigg have went from being a team who a few months ago looked like may have been in the kind of top 4 shake-up to now being a number of points behind Forfar, and they looked stinking. Yeah,
I mean, just sorry, before we move on, talk about Bonnyrigg, a couple of players that I don't want to talk up for Peterhead. I mentioned Forrest there, and it's not just that Forrest is a good football player, because he is. You know, you see the way that he can pick passes. I thought he was excellent in that game against Stirling Albion, and it's great to see players like that. See guys that play 11-a-side football, like a 5-a-side game. I think just that's a real skill, and there's quite diminutive midfielders, snake hips. You can send someone, take somebody completely out of the game, just a wee drop of the shoulder. Love guys like that, and Forrest can do that. But on top of that, Forrest can get stuck in as well. He's quite a wiry player. He's got quite a bit of gallus about him. I mean, there was a bit in the first half, just a very microcosm of his game there. I think it was the Bonnyrigg players, and just like jumping to block them with his 2 feet, like jumping in front of the ball and taking the knock on the ball and being able to carry it forward. Just that sort of stuff where just not letting anyone by you. That's great. And then he can also pick a pass as well. Mention Max Barry. He's class. He's done really well since stepping up from the Highland League. Dunn, obviously a quality player, perhaps injuries and so on, not really let him reach his potential and quality. I think for his hat-trick, if you were to add up the distance that those goals were finished from, I think it must be about 40 yards from those 3 goals.
They did say in an interview, they kind of, admittedly, and quite rightly so, they talked up the quality of the deliveries into the area. But I do think it was a mixture of him knowing where he needed to be,
yes,
good deliveries into the area, and ultimately dreadful defending from Bonnyrigg.
I think that leads us nicely. That's enough about Peterhead. Let's get on to Bonnyrigg. See if you didn't know any better, and you just said this is a Scottish football match. Tell me what the context is. If I didn't know any better, I would have said this is an SPFL side taking on a non-league team in the early rounds of the Scottish Cup, because Bonnyrigg looks so easy to play against. I mean, just for an example of the goals, you and I spoke off air. There were two. Watching these on my laptop, I watched them just before I jumped on this with you. I actually was like, for fuck's sake, I was actually like angry at my laptop out the calibre of Bonnyrigg's defending. The goals, Quality's goals, I think the third one, and the second one just seems to go through Andy McNeil, the goalkeeper. It's one of the, I don't know how it actually ends up in the net from where the angle of the camera is. It's hard to tell. But the fourth goal, Dylan Forrest's goal, the ball's cut back to the edge of the area. And basically, there's no one there. It's kind of like the goals that Scotland conceded against Greece. You know, just where the balls worked down a channel, and think that they were getting a lot of luck down the channels. Bonnyrigg could not defend the wide areas. Anytime the ball's come down the channel, but the ball gets squared to him at the edge of the box, there's no one there picking him up. There's not. I mean, I don't know where the midfielders are supposed to be tracking his run. His shoot's right at the goalkeeper. It goes right through the goalkeeper as well. Bad goal to lose for a number of bits where there's points of malfunction. Then Carnworth's goal, the fifth goal, the ball comes to him there. He's standing. The Bonnyrigg players are ball watching. There's a guy. I can't remember who the Bonnyrigg defender was. It might have been Callum Connolly. But you're standing like 2 yards away from the guy, and you're watching the ball break to him. You should be on top of him. You should be goal side of him, and he's just allowed to pass the ball into the net. Deeply frustrating stuff, and that's why Bonnyrigg are in the trouble they're in. Just because if you can't do the simple things right, like track a midfield runner or mark someone in the 6 yard box, what chance you got?
Yeah, you're right. There was no ability to, or it didn't look like. It didn't bear in mind like Peterhead's highlights are good. There's like maybe 11 minutes worth in there.
They are good highlights.
But it was almost non-stop Peterhead pressure. And there was an inability to stop crosses, an inability to defend crosses. You're right, it didn't feel like there was anything from the midfield to protect the back four. McNeil, who is on loan from Wraith, and I think he's okay. But he's 24 now, and he's only played about like 20 games in his career. Maybe slightly more, maybe about 30. Like it feels like, it looks like without going through it, and it looked like an inexperienced squad, but I'm not entirely sure that is the case. Maybe it's just a squad that lacks quality and lacks confidence, which is not what you want if you're about to finish 10th in League Two. Yeah,
I think you're absolutely right. Confidence was the thing. When you're losing goals like that, you imagine players to be digging each other out, because you shouldn't be losing goals like that. But it just seemed, let's get this wrapped up and let's get on the bus back down the road.
You're right. It felt like an acceptance, almost from like 1 or 2-0.
Yeah, I mean there was a bit in the. I've actually put down my notes here. I think it was Max Barry had a chance at 2-0 where I think he had a shot. It just went wide, or McNeil had a save that pushed it past the post, and it was the ball was basically clipped. I can't remember who the thing might have been. Danny Strachan clipped the ball over the top of the defender for Barry to run onto. And it's like, how on earth has he been given that amount of space to run onto? It's just, but it was like that all the time. Can't he defend wide areas? Can't he defend the penalty box? Can't defend the edge of the penalty box? Just all those factors, and it's just Peterhead really looked like they were enjoying themselves. And you know that's something as well. They were able to play 5 different pieces of goal music. I don't know if you noticed that. Remember, Shaughan, in fact, this might be a year ago or so, we were talking about them playing Hawaii 5-0 for their team and thinking, that's really weird. You should only play that when you're 5-0 up. They did. That was the music they played for Carnworth's goal for number 5. So fair play to them for managing to do that. But you know, I think Peterhead are in a really good place to go on and win the league. You talk about hard run of fixtures, but they're 10 unbeaten. Yeah. So I mean, they've not lost to anyone in the division. I know some of those have been draws. But you're at a stage where you're 4 points clear, you're in a pretty good place. Bonnyrigg, meanwhile, you know, they rolled the dice, similar to around the same time like they did last year when they got rid of Robbie Horn to bring in Callum Elliott. They rolled the dice, hoping they'd get some kind of managerial bounce. Johnny Stewart's come in, I think he was the Trinent manager, am I right in saying?
Yeah.
And it's just not worked. It's just not worked. I mean, at least with Elliott, I remember being on a podcast with you when Stennismuir had the trophy. Stennismuir won the trophy or got presented with the trophy. That was it. Bonnyrigg drew that match 1-1, and that kept them up in the division. They ended up going on to finishing in 8th. And I remember saying that's the best I've seen them. They've got better over the course of the season. It really feels like Elliott's trying to evolve the playing style and move them away from the sort of the meat and potato stuff they were doing under Horn. But I didn't realise that evolving the playing style would just be signing players from Trinent. And I think that's one of the problems as well. If you sign a lot of players from the Lowland League, and I've experienced this myself with Stennismuir, you sign a lot of players from the Lowland League at once, and I'm not going to be disrespectful to the division because there's a lot of good players in there, but you can't sign teams full of players and expect them to go into the SPFL and to make the team better. I think you sign one or two to try and raise them up to the standard that's needed in League 2, but you sign so many, I think you just drag it down to Lowland League level. And again, not being disrespectful to the Lowland League because there are some good players there, but having seen a manager try to do that for myself, it doesn't necessarily work. And this is when you get results and seasons like we're getting at the moment.
It's funny because let's say Bonnyrigg do finish bottom of the pile, so they'll either play presumably Brora or East Kilbride. Now I don't know too much about either side. What I do know about Brora is that they have Shane Sutherland, who scored a ridiculous amount of goals this season, albeit in the Highland League. But you think the fact that Brora have Shane Sutherland. How many times have we spoken about Bonnyrigg and how many forwards they've used since they've come into this, since they've come into the SPFL over the last 3 years? They might have had 15 forwards, maybe more. Like none of them would even be remotely as good as somebody like Shane Sutherland. So it kind of just feels like they've not quite, for whatever reason, they've not quite grasped what they needed to do, despite the fact that it felt like they had a good support for that level, and it's not quite worked out. And I do worry about them because it felt like they're one of the few teams to get promoted to the SPFL that felt like they weren't externally backed, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I think the teams that have come up, I think Bonnyrigg have brought the most colour and the most noise to, and again, I don't want to be disrespectful to Edinburgh. I really like Edinburgh City. So certainly I have grown to love Edinburgh City under Michael McIndome, the team that he's been. There's second mention for the big man on this podcast. But then Cove Rangers sort of like steroid fueled to get to where they were. Same with Kelty Hearts to an extent, although Kelty Hearts I know they're going through a bit of that tough time, but New Central Park's a good place to go. Good people there. I think it's a good club. I think they once they find their level, whatever that is, they're going to become a good SPFL club. But I do think Bonnyrigg are just in terms of like well back, they really feel like a community club. I remember the interview Kieran McGuigan gave after they got promoted. You know, the community is common unity. And I thought that's brilliant. You've been practicing that. That's a really good line. And while I do think that the community aspect that Bonnyrigg bring is really important, conversely, they do feel, to me, like perhaps the most parochial-minded club in the SPFL. And what I mean by that is that it feels like they only do their business within like a 10-mile radius in New Dundas Park. Yeah. So in terms of like, for the Callum Elliott is the manager. I know Callum Elliott's had a bit of experience elsewhere in Scotland, but very much knows players from that area, having managed, I think it was at Tynecastle and Cowdenbeath and Trinent. So he knows the Lowland League. But then when they bin him off, they bring in Johnny Stewart, who was their played with him. I think he might have captained the club for a number of years. So you're just bringing in someone, and I know that it'll mean a lot to Stewart given his connection with the club, but just it meaning a lot to you, it might not be enough to figure a way out of bother. And it's like, if you're going to change the manager, you're just kind of going back to something that's you've had previous. I know it's different circumstances, but do you know what I mean? It's like a familiar face.
It feels like they're being tentative at their SPFL survival, and that's not what they need. They probably need to be a wee bit, and I don't mean they probably need to be a wee bit more bold. I don't know how to describe it, but their entire tenure in the SPFL has felt tentative due to the fact that they've recruited a number of players, but it kind of feels like they're not quite SPFL quality. And I suppose here we are.
I mean, the only player that you could say been, I mean, I can't say I know Bonnyrigg like intimately. Paddy Martin when they sign Paddy Martin, you think, well, that's a class signing, because that's it. You know yourself, you get a good goalkeeper that wins you like 5 or 6 points a season. You get a good goalkeeper, it just makes everyone confident, and Paddy Martin was that. And I think that if they do go down, Paddy Martin will be someone that moves on elsewhere. But yeah, it just feels like that, and I know that money's tight, and I'm not sure if that since the chairman passed away, that they do have got that direction off the pitch that they might need to move on. Certainly that they've moved in the right direction in terms of the pitch and getting their bronze licence back. That's great news. You just don't want to do all this hard work off the pitch, and the teams playing in the Lowland League. And thinking about the pitch, I was thinking, oh gee, I mean, if I know East Kilbride play them in the playoff. East Kilbride like to play football. How will they get on in that pitch? Surely that's a leveller for Bonnyrigg. It's not. Even they can't win their games at home. For instance, perhaps the best footballing side in that division, Edinburgh City, went there and won 1-0. Edinburgh City were able to. Michael McIndoe spoke about it in his third mention. Spoke about it in that post-match interview where he just he put big lads along the back and just push the defensive line up quite high up, because ball's probably not going to, if anyone kicks it, it's going to go back to the goalkeeper. Just push it up and just constrain the match in quite a tight area and just go for the breaks. And ultimately, that worked for them. So, I mean, it's not like East Kilbride are going to go there. They know they like to play football at the back. It's not as if they're going to go there and struggle, because no one seems to struggle there.
Yeah.
It's a shame. It's a shame. I hope I know the game needs to progress, and it's ultimately good to see teams moving backwards and forwards through levels. But I just didn't think Bonnyrigg would be the first team to go down, and I don't really want Bonnyrigg to go down. I do think they have brought a lot to the SPFL.
Yeah, no, true. Maybe it'll be Forfar. Who knows?
I don't think it will be Forfar.
I don't think it will be Forfar.
But at least with Forfar, you can see like positive signs of direction. You know, to beat the league leaders, that's a great result. And whatever that Jim Weir and Gavin Price have stumbled on there, it's really worked. And bringing in players, bringing Danny Denham, for instance, who's a real positive player and just a real positive guy to have around the place, that's worked. And I think that might be wrong in saying. I think he's had to miss a couple of matches. They played the Spartans, for instance, and he was ineligible for that. I don't think he's lost a game since he's come in.
No, you're right. He hasn't. He's been a real a positive totem for them.
Yeah, but I'd love to be a positive totem. I'd love to be someone's positive totem. But up next, Shaughan, you think it couldn't get any worse for Bonnyrigg? They're playing East Fife at New Dundas Park.
They will probably lose to East Fife. Yeah, they'll probably score first, as East Fife always seem to concede first. But I do think East Fife will win this one.
Yeah, that'll anger them. Just like when Scotland women took on Germany the other night. I think they scored too early, if anything, in that match. And then Peterhead versus the Spartans.
Peterhead will win a high-scoring encounter.
Excellent. Should be two very good games. But Shaughan, I think that should just about do us for this week's episode.
I think so too.
Yeah, if you liked what Shaughan and I have been discussing and want to hear a little bit more, as you mentioned, we are going to our Patreon to record a bonus podcast about Wraith Rovers season and their prospects for the running. And if that sounds interesting to you, then go to patreon.com/Terrace Podcast. For as little as £2 per month, you can get access to hours and hours of content, including Sean's thoughts about his beloved team. So, we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, class.
Now, there's a lot of action coming up this weekend, and if you're heading along a game to yourself, please do have fun, enjoy yourself, but unlike the Queen's Park fans who relentlessly bullied Lord Willie Haughey into relinquishing his association with the football club after calling him nasty names at a pub quiz, please do so respectfully. Thank you.